Now, living without a birth certificate is as good as having no identity or nationality. That's the situation children born of foreign parents could find themselves in if the proposed amendments to the Births and Deaths Act are passed. Instead of a birth certificate, the newborns rather, get a confirmation of birth. That's a piece of paper which is pretty much useless. They won't be able to access schools, hospitals, or get social help. My guest tonight, Liesl Miller, an attorney at the Lawyers for Human Rights and chairperson of the African Diaspora Forum, Vusimuzi Sibanda. Thank you very much for joining us. Is this even legal?
No, absolutely not. Firstly, the Constitution tells you that every child has the right to a name and a nationality from birth, and also the Birth Registration Act tells you that every child must be registered. So this is an amendment to the regulation. So changing the Act through a regulation is not legal, and the whole thing is just also unconstitutional.
Will it go through, though? It doesn't mean it's not going to work, does it?
It might actually go through, and if it does, it must be challenged in court, and I am 100% sure that it will not stand.
What is your response?
Well, I think like what Liesl has just said, what is very important, especially on the aspect of it being legal, is that South Africa ratified, the Convention on the Rights of the Children way back in 1990 and 93. And which basically, has got four core important, principles, which are non-discrimination, the best interest of the child. And what we are saying is that international law, once ratified in South Africa, becomes, domestic law. And trying to smuggle, this piece of legislation, into...
I mean, it goes against all of that, doesn't it?
Exactly. So there is absolutely no way. I mean, I'm not sure if whoever drafted that, maybe thinks that everybody's sleeping in South Africa, but I don't think that is the case, because it becomes very, very unfair to say all of a sudden we are saying that because maybe a parent is not in the country, legally, then we are saying that already automatically the child becomes, illegal. Yet the child has not made a decision that they want to be in South Africa.
So how will it work? So it affects illegal workers. I mean, even if you come over here and you do have a work certificate, it'll still affect you, won't it? Yes. So it means you would have to go to an embassy with this little piece of paper, which may or may not be recognized. Yes. There may not even be an embassy in the country.
Exactly.
Then what?
Yeah. So the assumption is that it will be easy for a child to just take the birth certificate and get, or the confirmation slip, and get a birth certificate from an embassy. But like you said, I mean, firstly, refugees can't approach their embassy because they are fleeing that country,
yes,
and they will lose their protection under the Refugees Act.
Right.
There are children who can't prove their nationality in another country. And then, of course, there are countries who don't issue birth certificates in the country. And the point of, and as you said, it will affect both legal and illegal foreigners in the country.
Which would be great for the economy as well. If we look at it from that point of view, they might go, well, I'm not going to go to South Africa. But all right, so what about those, let's take the worst case scenario, the children whose parents cannot take this piece of paper to an embassy, then they become stateless in a way, don't they? They have no access to anything.
Yes, I mean, it means that, for example, the right to have, a birth certificate, which is basically in South African law enshrined in the Constitution and international law, has basically been violated. And very, very interesting, I'm not sure if it's been thought through carefully, because what it means is, with the birth, confirmation, and if there is no embassy or the embassy does not issue a birth certificate, it means that this child must be smuggled outside South Africa. And I wonder how, the immigration officials will deal with this at the border, because, the border post is not supposed to allow any child who's without a birth certificate to cross the border. And in any case, it means that our children here in South Africa are now at risk of being smuggled outside the country, because anybody can go there with this funny piece of paper and say, look, this is my child, I come from Zimbabwe, I come from Mozambique, so I'm taking the child to my country to get a birth certificate. So how many
And we've got a problem with child trafficking anyway.
Exactly.
I mean, I think that's the thing that's going to really affect the most vulnerable, isn't it? So you have no access to schools, immunization, and then you just subjected to abuse, yes, because there's nobody looking after you.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why the Constitution tells you that birth registration must happen immediately after birth. And that's what international law also says. Because of the risk of being trafficked, of being left undocumented when your parents abandon you or die, and the hospital and the school won't know the difference between a confirmation of birth and a birth certificate. And so these are all just too many open doors for violations of human rights.
It just sounds horrible, doesn't it?
So and there's no legitimate purpose,
no,
as far as I can
tell. So why? I mean,
yeah,
the love of migrants in this country, I suspect that could be behind it.
Well, I think so, because obviously we cannot. We've had, I think, a few comments, I think, in the past, about, this, very, salty feeling, about, migrants. But one of the things that we're looking at, for example, is I'm just thinking about, South Africa complains we've got high crime rates and all that. And if we've got children that are born without birth certificate, it means that, we've got a generation that is growing up that does not have the opportunity to go to school. And when they cannot be employed because they cannot be employable, and in any case they cannot fit into society, so they're
creating a bigger problem.
So we're creating a bigger problem. When they commit crime, even tomorrow, you have no database, no record of these people. So you'll have ghost criminals, walking the streets that you cannot even trace because you don't have any biometric information that helps you to identify them. So very soon, in the next 18 or 15, 18 years, we might have murders, hijackings, serious crime that
we have
cannot
no
be
idea.
And no idea where it's coming from.
And the legal justification when it was put forward?
I can't tell any legal justification. The regulation or the draft amendment purely just states that this is the new position and there's no reason given. The one reason that I have heard from the DG is that people get confused and they think that the birth certificate is citizenship, which it's not. And so that's the first thing to understand, is that a birth certificate does not give you citizenship in South Africa. You still need to go to your embassy and get your nationality confirmed. But this is just too much of a violation. I mean, you might as well just write on the birth certificate that this is not citizenship. That would also be a way to prevent that confusion.
Much easier. And I gather that if, say, a South African's married to a Zimbabwean, then the father or the mother's name, who's ever Zimbabwean, doesn't appear on that birth certificate either, which would also cause problems when you're traveling because of the unabridged birth certificate travel requirements at airports.
Yes, I think basically what is happening is that now the law requires that, if one of the parents, to any child is not, a South African citizen, now they should go through, DNA tests in order to confirm that, basically they are, the real parent to that particular child, and only then can they, be added, on the birth certificate, which means that, and you don't do ordinarily, DNA tests for free. I mean, there's money that needs to be paid, and, parents are really struggling to raise their children because, especially, migrant parents, because of the difficulties that we have in the economy. So what basically happens that at the end of the day, the parent says, I know that this is my child, and I don't have that 2,000 rands or 4,000 rands to go and do a DNA test. So let's just leave it the way it is. And like you have rightly said that, it means that it becomes a problem for the child to cross the border. And at the end of the day, you also have got, especially with Black Africans, we've got a very, interesting issue when it comes to our surnames, especially that, culturally, the child takes the surname of the father and they want to go and do, there's a traditional, cultural practices. So it means that, for example, when this child is supposed to be taken to the ancestral spirits, if that is done, it means there becomes a problem because the child is bearing, a wrong surname. So we have not really taken, much cognizance to customary law, what basically affects, the native African.
It just smacks of problems, doesn't it? If there's no legal justification, I suspect there's a political one. Thank you both. Thank you both of you.
Thank you.
That's our show for tonight. News is next.